So, um, I want you to try and imagine an army that, well, doesn't need supply lines.
Right. No logistics whatsoever.
Yeah, exactly. An army that doesn't feel fear, and honestly, fundamentally, isn't even alive in any way we'd understand it.
It's just a completely alien concept. Yeah.
Totally. Like, it's not driven by territory or resources or, even hatred as we typically define it. It is literally just a walking physical manifestation of pure crystallized rage.
It's just a terrifying thought.
It really is.
Yeah.
And so today we are doing a deep dive into the demons of Khorne.
And I think it's important to state up front that this topic completely shatters, the baseline for how we usually understand conflict.
Oh, 100%.
Because even in the most devastating, like apocalyptic wars you can study in history, there is always this fundamental biological reality underlying all the violence, right?
Right, like living creatures fighting other living creatures.
Exactly. It's always a contest of wills between biological beings. But what we are examining today, well, it requires us to just throw that entire framework right out the window.
Okay, let's unpack this, because that is exactly the mission for today's deep dive. We're digging into some truly staggering excerpts from a text called The Red Harvest, Manifestations of Khorne's Eternal Rage.
Which is such an intense title, honestly.
It really sets the tone right. We're going to unpack the nature of these entities, basically the foot soldiers and generals of the Blood God.
Yeah, and figure out what their mere existence actually reveals about the grim, frankly terrifying reality of the 41st millennium.
Because to even begin to comprehend how they fight, or why they're so scary, we really have to start at the absolute foundation of what these beings fundamentally are.
Right, and as the source material makes abundantly clear, they completely jar the biological definition of life.
I mean, the ontological shift required to just understand them is immense, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely. We are basically looking at a localized reality where emotions actually have mass.
Wait, emotions having mass, like physical weight.
Yeah, where violence is a tangible currency and where the act of war is, stripped of all its usual political or territorial dressing.
That's wild.
It is. The text is incredibly explicit that these entities are not born. They don't possess any sort of cellular structure.
No DNA, no...
Right? No life cycle at all. They don't age, and they definitely don't reproduce. Instead, the book describes them as being, quote, forged.
Okay, right, forged. But see, forged implies, like, a creator, some kind of raw material, and a process.
Exactly.
So if they are made of flesh and blood, what exactly is the raw material here?
Well, the text says they are forged from the violent roil of Khorne's domain within the warp.
Meaning they exist quite literally as fractured shards of rage.
Yes.
But I'm really trying to wrap my head around the physics of that. Like, if they're just shards of a cosmic emotion, how do they physically pick up an axe?
Right. How do they interact with the physical world?
Yeah. How do they leave footprints in the mud if they're just, angry thoughts?
So that touches on the core metaphysical mechanism of the warp itself.
Could you break that down for us?
The warp is, essentially, it's a parallel dimension of pure psychic resonance. It is this vast ocean of raw, uniformed energy that actually reacts to the emotions and thoughts of sentient beings in our physical universe.
Like a massive super reactive mirror.
Exactly. Now, Khorne's domain within that immaterium isn't just a place you could visit.
Right.
It is an ultra-dense concentration of a very, very specific emotional wavelength. Rage, hate, and just this primal urge to kill.
Wow.
So when a demon is forged, you have to understand that it isn't an individual creature being birthed into the world. It's basically a localized projection of Khorne's own infinite rage.
Drawn into existence by his will.
Yes, and literally forced across the dimensional barrier until that pure psychic energy actually condenses into something resembling physical matter.
Oh, I see. So it's like a phase change in physics.
That's a great way to put it, yeah.
Like, water vapor condensing into ice. But instead of the temperature dropping, it's this ambient psychic rage becoming so incredibly dense that it crystallizes into physical armor and brass and muscle.
Precise.
Which is just a crazy analogy.
Yeah.
Because if you think about a hologram, right? Instead of being made of light, these things are made of weaponized, crystallized anger.
That's exactly it. And there's a huge distinction there. A biological human soldier, even a genetically enhanced one, they feel rage.
Right. It's a chemical reaction in their brain.
Exactly. It's an endocrine system response. But a demon of Khorne doesn't feel rage. It is rage.
The rage is literally its structural integrity.
Yes. And because they are constructed entirely of this single structurally integrated element, it removes all those vulnerabilities that usually plague a biological army.
Which makes sense, because you can't exactly demoralize a concept.
Right. The Red Harvest points out a really terrifying consequence of this. It says they possess zero ambition, and they literally cannot be corrupted.
Which completely changes the entire geopolitical landscape of warfare, if you think about it.
Oh, absolutely.
Because if you look at traditional, biological warfare, armies can always be compromised. You can bribe a general with land or wealth or power.
Or a faction might splinter because some subordinate decides he wants the throne.
Exactly. Soldiers get disillusioned, they get tired, they desert. But you cannot bribe a shard of weaponized anger.
You really can't because, ambition inherently implies a desire for a different, usually better state of being.
Right.
It implies self-interest. But these demons have absolutely no self-interest to satisfy.
Because they aren't selves in that way.
Exactly. You cannot corrupt them because there is literally nothing within them to corrupt. There are no conflicting desires, no hidden agenda.
No survival instincts to manipulate.
None at all. They're already absolute in their nature. And this leads directly into the text's description of their actions. It calls their actions, quote, mindless, perfect violence.
So I really wanted to challenge that specific phrasing, actually.
Oh, the word perfect.
Yeah, because the text calls their violence perfect, which sounds like an oxymoron to me.
I can see that.
Usually violence on a battlefield is messy. It's chaotic. It's full of friction and collateral damage. It's like the furthest thing from perfection.
Right. It's usually a complete disaster.
But I'm guessing perfect here doesn't mean flawlessly executed military maneuvers like a parade.
No.
It means perfect in a chemical sense, right? Like unadulterated.
Yeah.
With absolutely no other variables mixed in.
That is exactly the right way to frame it. We have to strip away our moral or, even our tactical judgment of the word.
Okay, so pure violence.
Right. When a biological entity commits violence, it is almost always a means to an end.
Sure. You fight to secure a supply line or defend a border.
Or conquer a resource-rich planet. The violence is just a tool to get what you want.
Right.
But for the demons of Khorne, there is no secondary goal. The violence is not a means to an end. The violence is the end.
So it's chemically pure violence.
Yeah.
There's literally no ulterior motive diluting it.
None. It is completely singular in its focus. And that is exactly why the text concludes that the most, quote, honest and pure force in the galaxy is simply the desire to kill.
Wow. Honest and pure. That is dark.
It is. But think about it. There is no hypocrisy with them. There's no propaganda required.
Right. You don't need a commissar delivering some fiery speech to convince these troops to march into the meat grinder.
Exactly. Their existence is entirely perfectly dedicated to the spilling of blood and the taking of skulls. Nothing else matters.
But, this naturally leads to a massive mechanical question for me.
Okay, what's that?
If these entities are native to this alternate psychic dimension, how do they actually breach reality?
Ah, the summoning.
Yeah. How do they physically get onto the battlefield to start swinging those axes? Because if we look at the mechanics of their manifestation, it is just as brutal and, frankly, just as physically terrifying as they are.
Oh, the mechanism of a warp breach is absolutely crucial to understanding the real threat they pose.
Right.
The source material draws this very sharp distinction between the forces of Khorne and, well, other localized threats that emerge from the warp.
Okay, how so?
Because for most esoteric entities, breaching the veil between the immaterium and real space requires really complex sorcery.
Right, which means it requires intellect. It requires like an arcane ritual, chanting specific geometric alignments, drawing chalk circles on the floor.
Right. It takes precision and a lot of hidden knowledge. It requires an intellectual engagement with the metaphysical.
But Khorne doesn't do intellect.
Exactly. Khorne, representing this chemically pure, mindless violence, inherently rejects all esoteric complexity.
So what do they do instead?
The text describes the summoning of Khorne's demons as a, quote, brutally simple affair.
Brutally wait, so it just requires the spilling of blood. That's literally it.
That is literally it.
So what does this all mean then? Let's look at the mechanics of that for a second.
Sure.
Does it mean that the very act of fighting against them, or even just like a massive conventional war happening between two completely unrelated human factions,
Right.
acts as a localized beacon, like a doorway?
Yeah.
If blood is spilled in anger, does that just thin the dimensional veil on its own.
Yes, and that is the exact mechanism. The warp reacts to that psychic resonance. The sudden, violent cessation of a biological life, accompanied by those extreme emotional spikes of terror and rage. It creates a micro ripple in the warp.
Okay, I'm tracking.
Spill enough blood, say, in a massive trench war artillery bombardment, and those ripples suddenly become a wave.
Right, the scale matters.
Exactly. That wave crashes against the barrier of reality,
Yeah.
creating this pressure differential, and eventually the fabric of real space literally tears.
Allowing the immaterium to just spill through, like water through a broken dam.
Exactly.
But wait, think about the terrifying loop that creates.
Oh, it's a nightmare.
Right. If you are, say, an Imperial Guard commander holding a defensive trench line and a rift opens up in front of you.
Your standard doctrine is to lay down suppressing fire.
Exactly. You shoot the enemy. You use heavy artillery. You inflict casualties to stop their advance.
Which is the rational biological response to a threat, right? You defend yourself.
But against the demons of Khorne, the currency of their arrival is blood. The text doesn't say it has to be a specific ritualistic sacrifice. It doesn't even specify that it has to be the enemy's blood, does it?
No, it does not. It is just blood spilled in the act of violence.
So let me get this straight. If you open fire and shred the first wave of demons, you are spilling their blood.
Yes.
And if they reach your trenches and slaughter your frontline troops, your troops' blood is spilled.
Also, yes.
Either way, you are unwittingly performing the exact psychic ritual required to invite more of them in.
It is a completely closed thermodynamic loop of slaughter. Cause and effect become horrifyingly literal here.
That is just, it's a terrifying paradox.
It really is. Let's walk through your trench scenario again.
Okay.
An incursion begins. A few dozen bloodletters manifest because of some localized violent event.
Right.
The defending regiment opens fire with las guns and heavy bolters. They manage to kill the initial wave, literally tearing them apart. Blood and ichor soak into the mud.
Okay.
But because the only requirement for summoning more of Khorne's demons is the psychic resonance of spilled blood.
The defending army has just reinforced the pressure differential.
Exactly. You're damned if you do and damned if you don't.
Wow. If you don't fight back, they slaughter your entire regiment. A massive amount of blood is spilled, and the rift widens.
Right.
If you do fight back, you slaughter them, a massive amount of blood is spilled, and the rift widens anyway.
It's completely inescapable.
The act of self-defense is mechanically indistinguishable from a summoning ritual. That is so bleak.
Which perfectly encapsulates their nature, right? They are an inevitable byproduct of a universe whose natural state is just constant war.
Yeah, they don't need sorcerers reading from forbidden tomes to bring them into reality.
Not at all. They just need reality to act out its natural, violent tendencies.
Wow.
It transforms their presence on a battlefield from a tactical deployment into something resembling a natural disaster.
Oh, that's a good way to look at it.
Right, because you cannot negotiate with a hurricane. You can't outmaneuver a tectonic shift.
Right.
And you cannot stop the demons of Khorne by simply engaging in conventional warfare, because the friction of war is the very fuel that sustains their manifestation.
It really makes you wonder how you fight them at all. Do you just run?
Basically, or you die.
But, okay, setting that tactical nightmare aside for a second, there is a massive paradox in the source material that we really need to address.
Oh, the hierarchy.
Yes. Because you would naturally expect that a force summoned purely by a chaotic feedback loop of violence, made entirely of mindless rage.
Right, you'd think they'd just be a mess.
Exactly. You'd expect them to be an uncontrollable, disorganized mob. Just a thrashing tide of limbs and weapons.
But looking at how they actually organize into what the text calls the Blood Legions, that isn't the case at all.
Not even a little bit. And this completely broke my brain at first. The text explicitly states they maintain a, quote, well-ordered, terrifyingly efficient hierarchy.
It's one of the most mechanically fascinating elements of the whole text, honestly.
But how? How can the words mindless rage and efficient hierarchy even exist in the same sentence?
It seems impossible. Right.
If they are just fractured shards of anger, who is like filing the paperwork, who is dictating the chain of command?
To resolve that paradox, we actually have to reevaluate what order means in a metaphysical context.
Okay, lay on me.
When we think of a well-ordered biological military, we usually think of bureaucracy.
Right. Logistics, strategic planning, tribunals.
Exactly. A chain of command imposed by intellect, discipline, and regulations.
A system fundamentally designed to keep the inherent chaos of war in check.
Yes. But the Order of the Blood Legions is not designed to suppress chaos. It is an order born out of the chaos.
Okay.
The text describes their structure as a grim pyramid of skulls, with Khorne himself at the very apex.
Right, I remember that phrasing.
This hierarchy isn't built on tactical genius or strategic brilliant maneuvers. It is a strict metaphysical meritocracy established purely through absolute strength.
And the capacity for slaughter.
Exactly.
So it's not a military command structure at all. It's more like a hyper-accelerated natural selection process.
That is a brilliant analogy, yes.
Because if you look at an apex predator ecosystem in nature, right?
Right.
Predators hunting prey, animals brutally fighting for dominance.
To an outside observer, it looks completely chaotic.
Exactly. It just looks like mindless violence.
Mm.
But structurally, under the surface, it is a perfectly balanced, ruthless machine.
Right. Every creature has its exact place.
Right. And that place is determined entirely by its ability to kill and survive.
That is the exact dynamic at play here, but just magnified to a cosmic scale.
Wow.
The hierarchy is not intellectual. It is entirely physical and absolute. The text highlights that their internal culture is defined by constant, brutal competition.
Categorizing the demons into the exiled and the ascended, right?
Exactly.
Let's talk about that dynamic for a minute, the exiled and the ascended. Because if they're constantly fighting each other for dominance, that implies their internal structure is basically just a perpetual meat grinder.
Oh, it absolutely is. It implies a constant, churning crucible of power.
So how do you actually move up?
To move up the pyramid, to become ascended, a demon does not display strategic brilliance. They don't execute a complex flanking maneuver to impress a superior.
Right, they just kill better.
Exactly. They simply have to be better at the singular purpose of their existence, killing. You ascend by literally stepping on the physical and metaphysical remains of those you have defeated.
Which includes their own kind.
Oh, absolutely, especially their own kind. And conversely, to be exiled means to have shown even a momentary weakness.
To have been bested in combat.
Or simply to have failed to spill a sufficient quota of blood in Khorne's name.
It's a meritocracy where the only metric for success is violence. The more efficiently you kill, the higher you climb.
It's ruthlessly simple.
But think about what that actually means for the poor enemy facing them on the battlefield.
Right.
If they are constantly pruning their own weak through this internal crucible, then by the time they actually hit a defensive wall in real space, you aren't fighting regular soldiers.
No, you are not.
You're fighting the hyper-lethal survivors of a continuous metaphysical culling process.
Which is exactly why the text describes them as terrifyingly efficient.
It makes so much sense now.
Right. A biological military hierarchy inherently accumulates dead weight over time.
Sure. Nepotism, political appointments.
Commanders who are decades removed from frontline combat, right? But in the Blood Legions, there is absolutely zero dead weight.
Because the dead weight is literally killed off.
Exactly. The hierarchy is constantly testing itself. Every single entity that holds a position of power in that grim pyramid.
Every bloodthirster commanding a legion.
Yes. They hold it because, in that exact nanosecond, they are the most lethal force available.
And the millisecond, they are not.
They are slaughtered and replaced by whatever was strong enough to kill them.
So the orders they give aren't like verbal commands over a radio network.
No, not at all.
They are psychic imperatives of absolute dominance. The strongest just dictates the direction of the slaughter.
Precisely.
And when you take this completely ruthless, perfectly pruned pyramid of violence and point it at an enemy line, I mean, it translates into a combat doctrine that basically nullifies the standard rules of engagement, doesn't it?
It completely nullifies them. The source material states that their combat doctrine is the most straightforward of any force in the galaxy.
Which is honestly their greatest tactical advantage.
Yeah.
Because they don't overthink, they don't hesitate, and they definitely don't retreat.
No. They do not employ complex strategies, feints, or strategic withdrawals.
They just act. The text describes their approach as the, quote, sound of a billion axes howling for blood.
Such a visceral image.
I really want to dig into that imagery.
Yeah.
Because it doesn't say the sound of marching boots or artillery fire or officers shouting orders.
Right. None of the traditional sounds of war.
The defining sensory output is the weapon itself, howling for blood. It is an overwhelming singular wave of sensory overload.
The emphasis on the auditory assault of a billion axes is very deliberate there.
Yep.
It highlights the sheer scale and the relentless momentum of facing them. Unlike a biological army, the demons of Khorne do not experience what military theorists call friction.
Friction, right. Define that for us in this context.
In conventional warfare, Friction is the accumulation of small failures, right? A squad gets lost in the fog, a tank breaks down, morale drops, soldiers hesitate out of fear.
All the human elements going wrong.
Exactly. Friction slows an army down. It makes them vulnerable.
But the Khorne Daemons have no friction.
None.
They don't have supply lines to sever. They don't have morale to break.
Right.
If you are a standard infantryman, you might hesitate, wondering if a flanking maneuver is too risky, or you might freeze up from the existential terror of dying.
But the demons lack the biological intellect required to even feel existential terror.
They just execute what the text calls a killing frenzy.
And we must examine that term, killing frenzy, really closely. Because in biological terms, a frenzy is a state of uncontrolled, often detrimental, wild behavior.
Yeah, like an enraged human soldier makes mistakes. They break cover, they ignore tactics, they become easy targets.
Exactly. But for the Daemons of Khorne, this frenzy is flawless. It is mechanically perfect.
Because they are unburdened by self-preservation.
Exactly. Every single action they take is 100% offensive.
Yeah.
They do not expend a single erg of energy on defensive postures, taking cover, or strategic withdrawals.
Wow. It just completely changes the physical dynamics of the battlefield.
It really does.
Because if an enemy defensive line breaks against a normal army, the attacking army usually has to pause.
Right. They have to regroup, consolidate their gains.
Move up their artillery, establish new supply lines before pushing forward again.
But if a line breaks against the Blood Legions?
They just keep going. They accelerate into the breach, driven entirely by the psychic scent of fresh blood.
It is a relentless tide. And you simply cannot outsmart a tidal wave.
No, you can't.
You cannot deploy psychological warfare against an enemy that possesses no psychology to manipulate.
Right. You can only meet them with kinetic force.
Which, as we established with the thermodynamic feedback loop earlier,
only serves to spill more blood and potentially widen the rift that summoned them in the first place.
it is a brilliantly constructed, completely inescapable nightmare.
Every single aspect of their existence reinforces the others.
Perfectly.
They are beings forged from pure rage, summoned by the exact act required to defend against them, organized in a system that rewards nothing but the capacity to kill, and executing a combat doctrine completely devoid of friction or hesitation.
And you know, when you synthesize all of these mechanical and metaphysical elements, it culminates in a deeply chilling philosophical conclusion about the nature of the universe they inhabit.
Oh yeah, this is where the text gets really heavy.
It is. This is where the Red Harvest transitions from describing a mere military threat to detailing a profound existential horror.
Right. The final sections of the text argue that the ultimate horror of these demons isn't just their physical threat.
No.
It's not just that a bloodthirster has a massive axe and really wants to separate your head from your shoulders.
No, that is a problem.
A huge problem. But it is what their very existence represents on a cosmic scale. They embody the triumph of pure, mindless violence over reason and order.
And that is the core of the terror they inflict upon the galaxy. It is the literal death of reason.
Yeah.
For all of human history, and certainly for the various spacefaring civilizations in the 41st millennium, the ultimate goal of progress has always been to impose order upon chaos.
To make sense of a hostile universe.
Right. Civilizations build sprawling cities, they establish rigid laws, they engage in intricate diplomacy, and develop complex, logic-driven technologies.
All to insulate themselves from the brutal, entropic realities of the natural universe.
Exactly. We want to believe that intellect, empathy, and reason are the highest powers in existence.
Because the alternative is just too horrible to think about. The Imperium of Man is basically built on the idea that humanity can conquer the stars through rigid organization, technological dogma, and sheer willpower.
We desperately want to believe that the pen is mightier than the sword.
That logic will ultimately win out over barbarism.
But the demons of Khorne exist as living, howling proof that this assumption is fundamentally false.
They are the universe's ultimate equalizer.
Yes, they are. No matter how much technology a civilization develops, no matter how profound their philosophical treatises are, or how intricate their diplomatic treaties.
None of it holds any weight when the sky literally tears open and a tide of chemically pure physical rage pours into real space.
Exactly. You cannot negotiate a peace treaty with a fractured shard of anger.
No.
The text explicitly states that their existence proves the universe is, quote, not a place of logic or hope, but a brutal arena where only the strongest survive.
I love the phrase you just triggered in my head. They're basically entropy with an axe.
Entropy with an axe. That is a highly accurate, if terrifying, summation.
Because what is their ultimate goal? The text says their objective is to turn the galaxy into a, quote, silent graveyard of skulls.
Which is such a stark image.
Just contrast those two images for a second. We just talked about their combat doctrine being the sound of a billion axes howling for blood.
Right.
It's the most deafening, chaotic, overwhelming sensory output imaginable. And yet, their goal is to use that deafening noise to achieve absolute, total cosmic silence. A silent graveyard.
The howling axes are the brutal process, but the silent graveyard is the inevitable result.
Wow.
And what does a graveyard of skulls actually represent in this context?
What do you mean?
Well, it represents the total eradication of biological life, of thought, of scientific progress, and of hope.
Leaving nothing but bone.
Yes, it leaves nothing but the inert calcium remnants of death. It is a physical monument to the nihilistic truth of their universe.
The text ends on such an unbelievably bleak note, doesn't it? Quote, war is the only constant, and in the end, all that matters is that blood is spilled.
Yes, it doesn't matter whose blood it is.
It doesn't matter why the war is being fought. Concepts like good, evil, justice, tyranny, freedom, oppression.
None of these concepts register in the immaterium.
The universe is just an arena, and the only metric that the fabric of reality actually cares about is the volume of blood hitting the floor. It is the ultimate rejection of meaning.
If we look closely at the language there, the triumph of pure, mindless violence over reason and order, it really forces the reader to confront a universe completely devoid of a moral arc.
Right.
In many historical narratives, there is an underlying assumption that order will eventually overcome chaos.
That the arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends toward justice, right?
Exactly. That the light of reason and science will banish the darkness of savagery. But Khorne Daemons operate as a fundamental law of physics in the 41st millennium to prove that assumption entirely wrong.
Just as gravity inevitably pulls objects together, the warp, through Khorne, inevitably pulls reality towards slaughter.
Precisely. Because they are forged from the warp itself, they aren't an anomaly to be corrected by better tactics or stronger weapons.
You can't just invent a better gun and solve the problem.
No. Fighting them isn't a war that can never truly be won in the conventional sense. It is a permanent metaphysical condition to be endured.
Wow.
The Imperium's greatest fear, as the text notes, is not just the physical destruction wrought by these entities, but the forced acceptance of the philosophical truth they represent.
That reason is a temporary illusion created by biological minds.
Yes, and that violence is the only eternal fundamental truth of the cosmos.
Man, that is a heavy existential weight to drop on a military commander holding a trench line.
I would say so, yeah.
Let's just take a breath and quickly recap the massive amount of ground we've covered today through this text.
Good idea.
We started by breaking down the ontology of a force that completely defies biology. Entities that aren't born, but forged as literal physical phase changes of pure psychic rage.
Right. And we examined the thermodynamic feedback loop of their summoning, where the violent act of defending yourself creates the exact psychic pressure differential required to tear reality open and invite more of them in.
Then we looked at the paradox of the blood legions, how a force of mindless frenzy organizes itself into a perfect, hyperlethal meritocracy.
A grim pyramid of skulls where the exiled are pruned, the ascended dictate the slaughter, and the only metric for promotion is murder.
And we saw how that brutal internal crucible translates into a combat doctrine entirely devoid of friction, a perfect killing frenzy, represented by the relentless howl of a billion axes, completely unburdened by fear, logistics, or hesitation.
All of which culminates in the ultimate nihilistic horror they represent, entropy with an axe.
The death of reason, proving that in their universe the only constant is war, and the only thing that actually matters is that blood is spilled.
Which is deeply unsettling.
It is. Which actually leads me to one final thought. And this is something for you, the listener, to mull over on your own. It's a question derived entirely from extrapolating the twisted metaphysical mechanics we just unpacked.
Oh, a hypothetical scenario based on their operational parameters. I like it.
Exactly. Think about the thermodynamic loop we discussed.
Right.
If the demons of Khorne are forged from the psychic resonance of rage in the warp, and if they mechanically require the active spilling of blood to breach reality, what happens if they actually win?
Oh, the paradox of the silent graveyard.
Right. If they successfully achieve their ultimate goal, if they actually manage to turn the entire galaxy into that silent graveyard of skulls where absolutely no biological life remains to wage war, to feel hatred, or to shed blood.
Do they paradoxically extinguish their own existence?
Because if there is no blood left to spill, There is no localized pressure differential to summon them. If there is no biological life left to feel rage, does the violent roil of Khorne's domain in the Immaterium simply lose its anchor and evaporate? Does their ultimate total victory mathematically guarantee their own annihilation?
It is a fascinating philosophical trap built into the very laws of their existence.
Right.
By achieving perfect cosmic violence, they eradicate the biological fuel that sustains their manifestation.
Exactly.
The ultimate triumph of death might literally be the only mechanism capable of killing that which was never alive to begin with.
It's a wild paradox to leave you with. Thank you all so much for joining us on this deep dive into the manifestations of pure rage. Keep asking the big questions. Keep questioning the mechanics of the universe around you. And remember, sometimes the most terrifying monsters aren't anomalies to be defeated. They are just the fundamental laws of physics howling for blood. We'll catch you next time.